Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Social Housing Roundtable, episode 201. A huge good morning to you all, a huge welcome to you all, and thank you to everyone who was sponsored or supported us during our first 2 centuries. And we're very much looking forward to seeing what the next 100 or so episodes are going to bring. I've been told we are stopping no time soon, and if anybody's interested in getting involved in the future, please reach out to Elaine Middleton or I, because she is absolutely making sure this wagon is rolling for a while yet. For those who don't know me, to those who are new, a huge welcome. There are over 175 of our episodes recorded and available on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, Amazon, wherever you find your podcast, so you can go and catch up on our backlog. But basically, this community exists to discuss, to debate, to disagree, to engage, and to hear from all sides of the table. We regularly, I think, as a society, have forgotten how to disagree. We've forgotten how to sometimes proactively and respectfully kind of disagree or have difference of thought or engage with a topic that's sometimes a bit difficult, and not just kind of sit there in a safe area and go, oh yeah, well, we kind of are talking about it, or we'll talk around it a little bit without really getting to the nuts and bolts. So that's what our community is here for. We're joined by tenants, we're joined by execs, we've got officers and engineers here, we've got out of sector consultants and specialists in different forms. So it's brilliant to have the community here and growing, and it's a huge welcome to you all. My name's Matt Baird. As you probably see from my screen, my background is quite broad. Obviously, I'm the founder and host of this amazing community, but I'm also a recruiter. I've been recruiting in social housing for the last 15 years. I've recently been working with WHG, who are with us today, on one of their assistant director positions, and that's been fantastic to support them with. But I'm also chair of the board for a local small housing association and charity in Birmingham called Spring Housing, and I'm the founder of one of the founding members of the Exempt Accommodation Forum and the chair of the Supported Housing Network. So my whole role is to bring people together and encourage debate and discussion. So today, it's no surprise, I don't think, to anybody that with the looming date that was the 27th of October yesterday, that Awaab's law was probably going to have to come up on the roundtable soon. I wasn't quite expecting it to be on day 2, but a huge thank you to Rob for coming on and saying, yeah, okay, we know what we're doing, and day 2, away we go. But to those who know WHG and have engaged with WHG before or seen them on the roundtable and whatever it might be, I think you'll know straight off the bat that actually WHG are doing some amazing work through health and housing partnerships for years now. So to bring them on and showcase actually how they're already prepared, where they are in their journey, and how the law and things that have come in have changed or affected their processes and what they're looking to achieve, will be fascinating. So if you have got questions, thoughts, ideas, please put them in the chat and make your intros, as some people are doing whilst Rob is going through his presentation. And then we will move on to a more open discussion and debate, I guess, maybe, once Rob has wrapped up. So without further ado, Rob, I'll pass over to you. A huge welcome to you for today, and thank you very much for joining us on the roundtable.
Thank you. And welcome to everybody. So I'm Rob Gilham, and I'm Corporate Director for Strategy, Assets and Transformation here at WHG. Apologies, I am not used to using Zoom, so there could be some interesting tricky movements going on my screen, but hopefully that will work. I have got a presentation, and I'll talk through that, and then obviously an opportunity to ask questions and have debate at the end. So if I just begin the sharing process. So hopefully now you can see that.
We can, that's working great. Thanks, Rob.
Brilliant, thank you. So now I'll work my way through the presentation. Okay, so WHG is historically a stock transfer landlord. We've got 22,000 homes across the Midlands. Oh, are you okay?
Yeah, somebody wasn't mute. I've muted them. You're all good.
Oh, brilliant. Okay. So we own 22,000 homes across the Midlands. We've built around 2,000 homes since transfer, and so we've actually, we've spanned outside of Walsall. Original stock transfer was in Walsall, and we've got our 2030 plan with a clear mission dedicated to the success of our people and places, and our ambition to provide safe and secure homes and deliver high quality services. And that very much obviously relates to the topic that we're going to be talking about today. And we're a value-driven organisation, so you can see on that slide our values. And I think that's really important. And one of the things I'm going to talk about in this presentation is a little bit about how we lost our way for a period of time, and hopefully we are back on track as a sector. And I think it's really important for us to understand that. As a business, we are a C1, V1, G1 organisation. We recognise that is a status that is a moment in time, and we need to keep working at it. So we are very dedicated to continuous improvement and continuously challenging ourselves. So yeah, so that's a little bit about us. And then in terms of Awaab's law, obviously you'll be aware of, this coming to being because of the tragic circumstances around the death of Awaab, a 2-year-old boy who was living in very, very poor accommodation, along with his family, of course, and had severe respiratory condition with prolonged exposure to mould and damp in that home, leading to his death. Oh,
I've done it again. It's okay. I just muted. It's fine.
That's okay. So that, very sad circumstances. But I think what was really shocking about that was the position really of the landlord. A landlord that didn't listen to its residents, didn't listen to individuals, didn't respond effectively to complaints, and didn't act properly. Had some very naive and biased views about the people that they housed, and that led to some really poor decision making, particularly around this case, but undoubtedly around many cases, and generally showed poor management and leadership. There was a lack of knowledge about what was going on in their own communities and in the organisation, and obviously that led to the tragic death in this particular case. So just coming on to what are we required to do? So set out here, obviously the law came into force on Monday. There are 8 key requirements it introduces, which are really around giving clear deadlines for activities where, and it sets out the expectations on the landlord to identify hazards, to categorise those hazards, and to put measures in place to address the hazard and to keep the residents safe. And that sometimes means, of course, having to remove the resident because a hazard cannot be dealt with quickly. So we need to make sure that we've got processes in place to do all that. It also picks up on the issue of communication with residents and making sure that we communicate effectively and that the resident understands what's going on and what our commitment is to fix that particular issue, and that we have qualified and competent professionals dealing with the problem. So a host of key activities and deadlines across the law that are about driving activity improvement, addressing issues that are of detriment to people's health in a really kind of managed, effective way. So the interesting thing is, why did we need another law? Because actually, as a landlord, we already have repairing obligations. There is already law in place. These are things that we should have been doing. So was this a rogue landlord who, had kind of lost their way and had failed to deliver on what was already an expectation in terms of providing good quality housing to our tenants? And of course, what we do know is the answer is no, because what then ensued was the exposure really of the sector to the fact that there were many, many of these cases going on, and that we kind of lost our way in terms of looking after our residents, and we were leaving people in really poor conditions. This had become a systemic problem in the sector. And to be fair, the whole sector became tarnished with, the high profile cases. And so we all had to reflect, and we certainly did that here at WHG. And of course, then in October 2021, the Housing Ombudsman released their spotlight report on damp and mould. It's not a lifestyle issue. And of course, that was one of the key things that happened in that case, and in many cases where there was a real belief that if anything was going wrong, it must be the tenant's fault. And so let's look there first and probably not look any further. And so there was a real focus then to change that and to move away from that. I don't know now if you can continue to see my screen.
We're on the systemic problem slide at the moment, Rob.
Okay, yeah, it's all right. I had somebody else's screen on my screen.
That's okay. No, we're not under sector context.
Brilliant. Okay, so what I wanted to explore very briefly is how did we get here? We're a sector built on purpose, seeking to serve some of the poorest members of the community. How did we end up in a place where we were leaving tenants in this terrible position? And of course, the reality is we all chase both government priorities, policy, and the money. And so, there were very clear targets set out historically around affordable homes. Historically, of course, our investment in homes have been driven by the Decent Homes programme in 2000. And I think in 2010, there was a feeling in the sector that we kind of concluded that piece of work. And so there was a real, move of focus into the real push for building homes and developing homes. And we saw the Affordable Homes Programme, which of course pushed funding away from grant funding into more revenue style funding from rents, which in some areas did not work at all in terms of funding development programmes. And I can talk about that from Warsaw's experience, because an affordable rent in Warsaw, the difference between an affordable rent and a social rent is about £12 a week. So we were never going to raise funds to build hundreds of new homes from the affordable rent programme. And so we diverted funds, as many organisations did, to make sure that we could develop homes, much needed homes, which of course is another challenge to the sector. I think it's fair to say as well that that process means that, we all need to raise money, and therefore, things like getting a rating from the rating agency becomes important. And so the whole sector then begins to respond to an agenda that's about making sure that we're financially robust, and we can prove that to lenders. And so suddenly our margins went up, our spending on investment went down, and we saw that kind of a real financial push to build a business that looks strong enough to build lots of homes. It's really interesting. The graph I've got here is what's happened since. So following the exposure of the sector to the problem of poor quality housing, we all shifted out. We all realised that we needed to shift our investment. And what we saw then was a real shift. So from 2021 to 2024, sector investment in maintenance and repairs went from 5.4 million to 8.8 million. Now, what that's done is it's undone some of our other strong financial positions. So, margins have gone down, in this particular one, interest cover has gone down across the sector. And that makes us less of an attractive sector to invest in from a lender's point of view. And we need to recognise that. And so that's challenged the sector. And it's been a real structural move in terms of where our priorities and our investment is going. So just to come on to, what we've done at WHG and how we responded to this. We've got a very active board. They are very involved in the business. They really understand the business. They spend a lot of time work shadowing and meeting residents. So they are very alive to what's going on. And they have a real clear line of sight into the business. So in 2021, the board, in partnership with the executive conversations that we're having, we commissioned a deep dive into damp and mould. And that set up our first kind of examination of what did we know about what was going on in our homes. We looked at complaints. We looked at repairing issues. We even looked at things like sentiment analysis on our social media to look where people had raised the issues. And we went through all of those things, and then we looked at our own stock condition, and we were just going through a process of improving our knowledge of stock condition. So we did a load of work around that as well. So that then led us to a big action plan. So over that period, then we knew that we'd got to do several things to get our business in a better position to respond to this issue of damp and mould. So we set up a specialist team. So we've got a specialist damp and mould team. We put our surveyors on specialist qualifications so that they understood how to tackle the issue. And you know, and we made sure that we got the skills in the team. We took the decision quite early on. Oh, there's that.
Kind of zoomed in a bit there.
Yeah, I don't know how I undo that.
There you go. You've gone back a page.
That's it. Okay, yeah. So yeah, sorry. Yeah, so making sure that we've got the right skilled people to do the job. As I said very early on, we resolved that any Cat 1 hazard, we would either move the tenant or resolve the issue. And so that we've had that from very early on. So we've dealt with that in that way. We trained all frontline colleagues, and we trained all colleagues in basic awareness. And some of that was around EDI and that not taking for granted the way that our customers act, and being really alert to the fact and listening to what they're saying, and making sure that we alert the business if we think there's an issue in terms of damp and mould, and that we collect it and do something about it. So we also set up a tenant experience working group. That working group, a number of them had actually reported damp and mould to us, so they'd been through the process, and they actually developed our policy and our service offer, and we did that through co-design. You know, they were incredibly helpful and insightful. They challenged us. They challenged some of our ideas, and as a result of that, we then developed a really new service around the kind of design that they thought was important. They made self-help videos for residents, so there was a bit of as well, you know, residents helping each other and giving each other advice, because they don't always listen to us. So that was really helpful. And we also did a big push on reporting of damp and mould, which was a challenge because we had lots of damp and mould reported. And that led to us having to, you know, add some additional resources into the business to deal with that. But what that meant was we'd taken a really positive approach, proactive approach to exposing damp and mould in our stock. Of course, we came up with a process, like we all do, a complicated process chart. I'm not going to dwell on that, but it meant that we were very clear in the business about how we delivered damp and mould. We also introduced a series of tech, again, known in the sector. We do have sensors. We use eco sensors. We're also in partnership with Cambridge University on a piece of research around the use of sensors to look at how we can predict and hopefully prevent issues in homes by having sensors that give us early warnings, and also looking at which responses to damp and mould are the most effective. So that's a really interesting piece of research that will play out over the next 12 months. Obviously, we've introduced video recording for tenants. You know, we've pushed on things like mechanical ventilation. One of the issues that tenants have is they quite often turn it off. So really understanding the importance of using things like that, air filtration systems. And then finally, the thing that we did was we've devised what's called the Home Site app. And that is an app that all of our frontline colleagues have access to, trades, housing officers, whoever's going out. And they score each home 1 to 4 on a number of criteria, including the external, the internal environment of that home. And what that means is we've got a very good stock condition position, but we get what's it like to live in that home from every person that visits that home. And so we're triangulating all the time what we think might be a risk. So we might have a home where our stock condition is telling us that's in really good condition, but actually this app tells us 3 people have been in that home and they've rated it really poor. So there's something going on. So that becomes a high risk home and we go and visit it. Likewise, we've got a program of visiting what we call quiet homes where we don't get reports of things. So that's how we're kind of proactively going after stuff. Obviously, you know, we've made sure that we report and that there's visibility around what's going on with the damp and mould across the whole business. This is reporting to our leaders, to our executive, and into our board, so we can see, you know, which of our damp and mould cases actually fall into the kind of Awaab law category, and therefore, you know, need to be dealt with under Awaab's law, and then what else becomes a request for a repair and a service request, and then that goes into our standard repair service dealt with by our standard times. So that's some exposure. We've also got here a graph that shows those reported damp and mould across a number of vulnerability categories. So we don't just look at the issue in the home, we match the issue with the home with any vulnerabilities known in that home. And that might mean something that's not a high priority repair becomes a high priority repair because there's a particular vulnerability in that home. So our policy recognises that. And then we also look at things like asset type. So this is the beginning of us understanding are the particular things that we need to identify, are the high risk homes which are not about occupancy, but they're just about property type, and how do we design our investment programs going forward to make sure that we deal with that and deal with any issues arising from particular homes. Interestingly enough, what this did reveal as well is, some of our highest rated EPC homes have had damp and mould in them, including some of our new build. So, don't assume that this is going to happen only in your really poor, old, stock. So we also recognise the impacts of poverty. There's just a reality here in Warsaw. So, 44 of our neighbourhoods are the most 10% deprived neighbourhoods in England. 1 in 3 children in Warsaw living in poverty. What does that mean? Well, it means that we've got people who live in fuel poverty, so they are making that choice between eating and heating. We've got overcrowding going on in our homes, and that leads to issues of damp and mould. And we've also got poor health outcomes, and obviously that relates to damp and mould, and so that's a really important issue for us. And we've picked that up through a particular programme. So some of you will have heard about this programme. It's called Acing Asthma. It's delivered through our community champion model. Community champions are people that we employ from that local neighbourhood. They become an employee and they have great networks in the community, and they effectively signpost and bring intelligence into the business. It's a health partnership. We identify children with asthma, both us and the NHS, and we link data where residents are happy to do that. And so that means if somebody's got severe asthma in our home, we know about it, and so we can work with that person. And then what we do is we've got a social prescribing team. They go in and we will work then with the surveyor and the social prescribing team to work with that family to make sure that we don't have major issues around the health of that child in that home. And we also work with the parents as well. And this links to things like some of our employability and capacity building programs as well. So they're all tied in. We've had some really great outcomes. So that's just some indicators of 115 families have been supported. A number of them, poverty was a real issue. And so doing things like money advice and increasing benefit and maximising benefit take up, doing referrals to GPs, there's lots of work gone on to support those families. So that's just a bit of a kind of one of our key projects that we've done to augment the work that we're doing around controlling and responding to the requirements of Awaab's law. I wanted to finish. This is my last slide, and it's just on culture and purpose. And I talked a bit about how did we get here. And, we got here because we lost focus, because we are under pressure. There are lots of pressures on the business. Assets is not, as much as I'd like it to be, it's not the only show in town. We are competing for resources with other bits of the business. But at the end of the day, our core business is we are a landlord and we are a social landlord, and we need to make sure that our focus remains on our residents, providing good quality housing. And we need to be really present in those conversations at board and at executive level to make sure that we safeguard the resources that are needed to deliver on the investment in our stock going forward, notwithstanding all the other challenges that are on us. And of course, we are now seeing more consultation on more potential challenges to the service and costs on the business. So it's going to be really important to stay true to those values as a business and that culture. So that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you very much, Rob.
I hope that was helpful.
mean, I certainly felt it really kind of set the scene nicely for why we're here today, and where I think that this isn't just kind of one small area of, oh, there's a new law in and we've just got to get on with it. It's far more than that, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely it is. Yeah, and you can't look at anything in singularity, can you? There's a context to everything, and what we've been doing Awaab's law. There's been so much other stuff going on in this business that we've had to respond to. The good thing was we gave ourselves a really long lead up, and I think that is a leadership issue around what are organisations doing around horizon scanning, planning forward for things, giving yourself space to do things, and what that does allow you to do then is to do real engagement. Because the other thing is, if you rush at things, some of the work that we've done has taken a long time, working with residents and building their capacity. So, I think, I think that's how we've managed to respond in a really positive way to this agenda.
There have been some things that have already come in through the chat that I'm going to go and bring in a moment. If anyone would like to come in at any point, please use the react symbol at the bottom of the screen and use the raise hand function. If not, just turn on your camera and wave at me and I'll absolutely bring you in. But one of the things that came up, Rob, and it's something that we were talking about before today, but it's also come in via one of the questions from Brian in the chat, which is talking about the main issues relating to communication. It's poor with tenants and internal between different business sections and silo working and the challenges there. And I know we were talking beforehand about a business that I met with last week before. So what, 2 weeks before Awaab's law comes in. Now they work in data, they work in tech, they work in a bit of a different area of the business. And their question was, so what are you guys doing about Awaab's law? I'm thinking if you haven't started yet, then something is wrong. But equally, I can kind of look at that and go, well, maybe there's a question there of the challenges that the business has already done loads, but some of the teams don't know about it because of the silo working and what's gone on there. How has WHG, and obviously this one, the reasons I wanted to bring yourselves on, I think Awaab's law, damp and mould, the community feel, the culture you mentioned, all of this seeps right through the business at WHG. And I think that's the only reason you've got to where you've got, you mentioned about the work you've done with frontline staff, but it wasn't just your housing officers, it's your trades teams and your operatives as well. Yeah. How imperative do you think that's been in terms of to getting to where you've got now? Case Management Solution Group, or CMSG, are the home of React, the UK's #1 case management system for ASB and community safety. We are delighted to have them as one of our key sponsors for Social Housing Roundtable 2025 into 2026. And with the ASB app now fully integrated to the platform, it allows residents to record, monitor and report issues directly to their case office in live time. What's not to love? CMSG are bringing simplicity back to case management, and I cannot recommend them enough and thank them for all of their support through this period and through the rest of the year. Thank you, CMSG, and do please go check them out on social media and on LinkedIn. Thank you.
I think it's really important. It's really interesting. My background, I was housing director here, corporate director of operations, moved into assets, and obviously I've got corporate strategy in my portfolio. So it's an unusual job. But one of the things I was really interested in, I'll give you an example. One of the words that we've banned here is DLO. We've got 250 colleagues who deliver a service just like the other colleagues in the business. They belong to this business. They're part of this business. And when I was a housing officer, one of the things I was taught really early on is, you go into a home, you are the landlord of that home. So everything that relates to that home, you've got to think like I'm the landlord. So you care about the tenant, you care about the home, you care about the environment, the garden. You're constantly clocking things and thinking about things. And so I've taken that into assets, and I think it's really important. One thing I'm really proud of is we did a big piece of work a long time ago now, 7 years ago, around safeguarding. And what we recognised was, who sees our customers the most, who is in the homes of our customers and is almost invisible in those homes, and it's our trade colleagues. And so we did a big piece of work where we trained all of our frontline colleagues in safeguarding, and there's a button now on every trades device that if they've got a safeguarding issue, they hit the button. It gives them some advice. It puts them through to a safeguarding lead. I am the safeguarding lead corporately for the business. And one thing I'm really proud of is we've got a fantastic support team, wellbeing team, which Connie, some of you will know Connie Jennings, looks after, which is fantastic. But their #1 referral rate is our trades. It's not housing officers. and that tells a lot about the culture of the organisation.
And it's also imperative, if we're ever going to get to where we need to, that more businesses follow that theme. I can see Alicia's got a question. I think then I was going to bring in something from Tim, then Caroline, then I'm going to Dunny. So Alicia, I'll bring you in first.
Hi, Matt. Thank you. I just wanted to point out something that Richard Blakeway has said. Landlords must not lose sight of the qualitative elements. This includes assessing inspections, providing suitable temporary moves, and clear, empathetic and accessible communication, including the required written summaries. There is a risk of false assurance if governing bodies focus only on the tangible targets. I'm disappointed. I obviously am involved at the tenant side of things and got 2 questions from tenants yesterday that won't be covered by the Awaab's law. They're very basic questions that I have been trying to answer, talking to tenants nationally. And I am so disappointed that between us, we have failed so miserably, and I include myself as an informed tenant in this. We've failed so miserably to properly communicate this to everyone. One thing was a very minor issue of damp and mould, which, as we know, we are talking, as far as Awaab's law is concerned, we're talking about significant and urgent issues which will affect the health of the residents and visitors to their home. We're not necessarily talking about a spot of mould in a bathroom. And secondly, there was total confusion for one tenant about decanting. They were blaming the housing association because the local authority hadn't put them at the top of the list for being moved. They failed to understand the responsibilities of the housing association via the local authority. These are very basic things. We have people like Brian on he's the one I can notice on my first page here. Brian on here today. We are people who've been talking about this, who've been involved in Awaab's law since the very beginning. And I say shame on all of us, and I include myself, because we have failed miserably. Sorry?
Just so we can kind of, so is it because you feel that some parts of the law haven't been covered, or is it that you feel that the law...
It hasn't been communicated significantly. And there are people on here today that I'm talking to, IT, I think, should be offering more. But and whether people just are choosing not to understand, I don't know. As I say, this is from a tenant point of view. This is not blaming just landlords. We need to understand why. As I say, I'm totally frustrated that only one of the queries that came through to me yesterday is something that Awaab's law is going to help, and we need to. I've written on LinkedIn this morning. I just feel like knocking heads together this morning, because as I say, I've been talking about this. I'm housing ombudsman. I'm on the panel. I'm on the sounding board at 4 Million Homes. We have been trying to educate people. There are still massive gaps in that bit, because as I say, I speak from the tenant. That's the bit that I'm involved with.
I'll go to Rob, but thank you, Alicia. I mean, Rob, I think on that, in terms of, not just in terms of the depth of the law, but in terms of how it has been received by tenants and how engaged, I guess, they've been with this massive piece of legislation that's obviously vital for the sector, but also, I think actually for the first time in a while had a lot of media coverage behind it as well. How have you found kind of tenants have engaged with yourself upon, and asking questions about the new law and asking questions about what might change for them and their rights?
I do think there's a certain reality here that if this doesn't hit you, so if you haven't got damp and mould, you're probably not that interested in it at the moment. And I think, we've done a lot of work, particularly with people who are suffering with damp and mould. So we, as I said, we did that big piece of analysis of anybody that had reported damp and mould to us. And we went back to them and we communicated with them to say, how is it going? Do you need to report it again? If anybody reports even a mild case of damp and mould with us, it triggers at the end of the month, they get a call back to check, if we've given them advice about dealing with very low levels of damp and mould, it triggers a call back. So we've got lots of that going on. I think you saw in my presentation, we do continue to track the low levels of damp and mould. So a tiny number of people, it is true, will meet the categorisation of Awaab's law. What this has done is, for us, it's massively raised the profile of all those other cases that need doing, because some of those cases, they are on the journey to becoming a Category 1 hazard.
But that's
so we
also
make sure that we
thing from WHG of going, that's what we're going to do, because not every landlord will do that. There will be landlords out there who will just wait. And that's going to be maybe the challenge we're going to have, is I think there'll be some landlords who will wait until it kind of reaches that threshold and then act, rather than yourselves who are trying to be proactive on it.
Yeah. And in terms of, the communication, one of the ways that we did try to bridge that was to get tenants to communicate with tenants. So, all of our communications have gone through a residents group who have experienced damp and mould. So it was that particular group. So they really challenged the language that we were using, the accessibility of it, the clarity of it. So hopefully the collateral that we've got around the communications of Awaab's law is reasonably clear. And then, of course, we also did these videos as well. So we've got tenants speaking to tenants about their experience of damp and mould and what to do and how to report it. So we've done a lot. We will continue. It's really interesting. If you do any survey of anything, one of the outstanding things that comes up is communication. We've just done a colleague survey, and our colleague engagement is really, really good. But it still says, well, you could improve communication, just a little bit more. And we're like, no, people get fed up of us telling them things. So I think that will be an ongoing theme for the whole sector, talking to residents, communicating. I think the other bit is the proactiveness around, are we looking for and going after poor housing? And that's a challenge to us.
I mean, Tim has said in the chat, so I'm going to bring up Tim's chat, then I'm going to Caroline, then I'm going to Adunni. But the point from Tim was that how do you rank the elements from the slide you gave? You slide to give you the risk. So I guess when you're looking at the asset condition database, how do you kind of rank those elements most importantly out of the areas that you listed on your slide previously?
So obviously, we've got a really good level of asset database. We know that what our stock needs, and that's profiled. We know what EPC it's reaching. So we've got that database, and that effectively drives our investment program. So where something might need insulation, or if it needs a component replacement, that's in our program. So as standard as you would expect. One of the things that we identified here is that that kind of assumes, bearing in mind you only do a stock condition survey every 5 years. So some of our stock might need a more regular condition survey, and that can either be about the building itself, perhaps going through a period where it's going through a bit of a rapid decline, or it can be an engagement with occupation as well. If we've got overcrowding going on, that can often lead to an issue with a home. So that's where we introduced our home site app. And what that does is, across a number of indicators, it gives frontline colleagues the ability to score that home. And then all those are collated together. So we only launched it in the summer, so we haven't got lots of data at the moment. But what we are intending to do is triangulate that against the stock condition survey. And what that will do then is it will raise a risk. So it will basically say, we did a stock condition in this home 3 years ago. It says the condition is good and doesn't need any replacements of anything in the next 5 years. So why is our home site app telling us it's poor housing, that there are poor housing conditions going on in that home? And it will tell us, it might be the outside of the property, it might tell us it's the inside, it might tell us about the challenging conditions that are going on in that home around overcrowding, and it might tell us around things like the garden and the environment that are going on. So across a number of indicators. And then that means what we might do is do a more regular survey of that home. So that goes up in the risk register. So that home might get a survey in 2 years instead of 5.
And it's that way of understanding the asset without trying to be too kind of on top of a resident all the time. That balance is obviously there as well, which is fantastic to hear. I mean, Caroline, I'm going to bring you in because I know you've got something similar on that kind of what happens next kind of piece. Alert Call return as one of the keynote sponsors for the Social Housing Roundtable in 2025 into 2026, and we're delighted to have them back. Alert Call help as many people as possible feel safe, connected and informed by combining ingenious technology and award-winning human contact. As you can see from this touchscreen I've got with me, Alert Call's digital engagement solution helps social landlords proactively know their customers and properties by putting a portable touchscreen in every home, offering a daily property check through the optional OK Each Day service, plus repairs reporting, tenant surveys and much more. They also provide Beyond Warden Call, an easier, simpler and lower cost wireless warden call solution with video door entry, dispersed telecare and smoke alarms. Alert Call work with over 60 housing providers across the UK to enhance two-way engagement between customers and their landlords. In 2022, Alert Call won the Queen's Award for Enterprise and Innovation, and in 2023, Alert Call won Housing Supplier of the Year. We're delighted to have them back with us throughout the course of this year, and please do go check them out on social media and LinkedIn to find out more. Thank you very much, Alert Call, for sponsoring us again.
Yeah, so Moat have done some amazing work. We've got a damp and mould team. We've probably a lot of people that follow Moat would know that we've changed our contractors, and we had to do that. So we do loads of great work. However, I have a specialist role at Moat and I work in our allocations team. We have no internal waiting list. We have no process for people that have chosen to or are overcrowded. Limited access to our stock, like a lot of us, because a lot of stock goes to local authority, medium-sized housing provider. And over the years, we've spent a lot of money on serviced accommodation. And I am feeling the pinch at the moment on the panic on customers got damp and mould, we need to move them urgently. And from my point of view, I need to see the property services report. I haven't got property services background. I was interested to hear this category 1 wording because I don't think Moat are doing that. I think we're being very reactive at the moment, and we're trying to rehouse a lot of people. We're trying to rehouse a lot of people internally with our stock, and that's not always the best thing for Moat because sometimes we don't understand our empty homes. Some of our empty homes, unfortunately, have been empty quite a long time, and they might not be the best empty homes either. And we've had a few customers, unfortunately, and we've moved them, and then they've gone to another empty home that's had another few little issues. So the customer ends up getting moved and moved and moved, and then eventually we might say, would you like that to be a permanent move? And actually, the way that I see this legislation first and foremost is that we need to be acting in a timely manner, and we need to be carrying out the works that are needed. And to me, does the customer want to be forced out of the home? If a customer has to move out, do they want to move permanently? If they want to move permanently, let's have that conversation at the start. Let's not say you got to uproot your life 4 months and then really sorry, it's actually not 4 months, it could take a little bit longer. It's a really difficult thing for a customer. And also the overcrowding, we do have flexibility there, so there might be an instance where we acknowledge, okay, that's actually statutory overcrowded and maybe the local authority haven't got it within their gift to assist us, so we'll use whatever powers we can to try and rehouse. But at the moment, I just wanted to know what other housing providers are doing. Does anyone else here work in allocations? Is anyone else noticed that you're spending a lot more on serviced accommodation, or what are you doing? Are you rehousing a lot of your customers as a result of this, or is it just Moat?
I certainly don't think you're alone. I mean, I can see a couple of people, I've seen a few posts this morning, testifying to exactly this. Someone said, is this setting up social housing to fail because we don't have a plethora of properties to just move people to? And there's one of the points that you've just seen from Alicia in the point there, saying that this is one of the issues that we were concerned about from day one. I mean, Rob, in terms of what's happening at WHG, are there any insight you can provide?
Yeah, there's probably a few. There's quite a lot in there, so I'm just trying to think about the thing. So the first thing is, I think, understanding what are your category 1 hazards, and where is it better to move somebody out of their home. We always have to remember, don't we, that removing somebody from their home is quite a significant thing to do. So you only want to do it really if there is a real potential for harm to that person. And so I think getting that categorization right is really important. And that's where, we talked earlier about having professionals who really understand attending and making those decisions. So we've gone a long way to do that. And because we've had that decision for a long time, so we've been doing that for about 3 years now, the decision to say, if we can't resolve the category 1 hazard, you move. We've managed to fine tune that, and and I could put you in contact with our director of services, who I'm sure would happily talk to you about how we've done that. So we've done that. Sorry, that was the first bit of the question. I'm just trying to think about what else was in there. In terms of temporary accommodation, we did see a rise in temporary accommodation, and that's, we definitely have more temporary accommodation than we've had in the past over that period since we've introduced that rule. What we do have, though, is we have visibility of it, and what that does push is then is where we've got issues that we can't quickly resolve in a home. And I'll give you an example of this. And you probably have, if you've got flatted accommodation, you'll have this: a leak from a flat above where the resident will not give you access. And so we've got much smarter now about things like injunctions, because it used to just take us forever to get into the flat above if they weren't willing to do that. And so it's really interesting now. It's exposed an issue for us of weakness around that resident now is staying in temporary accommodation because you cannot get into the flat above. And so that suddenly became a housing management challenge. And so we did a load of work in partnership with housing management and with our legal team to say, we need to be able to do that because those problems are not going to go away. I think the overcrowding one is a really interesting thing. We're in a very similar position here. We closed our waiting list. We've definitely got overcrowded people. The reality is, if you are overcrowded, you can go onto a waiting list and you can look for another home. The reality is we've got to find ways of helping people live in overcrowded homes because there aren't enough homes out there. We've got a decent development program. We developed 700 homes last year. We're going to develop about 350 this year. So, we're doing what we can to fulfill that challenge. But I do think as well, helping customers understand, if you are overcrowded, how do you live in a home and make the best use of it that you can? And the reality of that is a real challenge to us in the sector, and we need to get to grips with that. Including interesting things, I've had interesting conversations with our director of housing around communal gardens, for example. So we're very good at saying nothing must go on in a communal garden. Well, if you've got flats full of families with children, we need to rethink some of the ways that we've worked historically, because the reality is overcrowding is probably here to stay.
I'm going to dive in, Rob, just because of time and where we're running through, but I hope that helped Caroline.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. Really helpful.
Yeah, and let's happy to catch up and share some stuff.
Yes,
there have been some comments in the chat really thanking you for your candidness as well. So thank you very much for that. But Adoni, I'm going to bring you in. Thank you for being patient.
Hi, morning, everybody. Good to see everyone. And thank you, Robert, for a really, really good presentation. And thank you, Caroline, for that question. I did say in the chat that it's really important that there is that kind of candor around where there is struggle to sort of meet the needs of what we're being asked to do. There are a couple of points that I wanted to make. First of all, and ever since this tragedy has come to become a reality, and Grenfell became a tragedy that came to be a reality, I think the thing that's made me the most sad about our sector is that for various reasons, we aren't able to push towards best practice. We're always heading for this floor of whatever legislation says we have to do. And I think that what is happening is that we're starting to see that this simply isn't good enough. And don't get me wrong, I'm completely well aware of the fact that resource is probably the biggest driver for why we head for where we head for. But something needs to change. And I think this is also part of having these sorts of discussions and raising our voices and saying that, yeah, we want to do much better than whatever the minimum is, but it's how we get to that. And I think part of it is, what Caroline did, which was ask for help as well. So I think that's a really important part of it. And I sit on a board as well as I work in development. And I think one of the things that was being alluded to before, I think by Alicia, is this gap that exists between boardrooms, which almost become echo chambers of best practice. There's all of this talk of we're ready, we're prepared, we know exactly what it is, which isn't necessarily mirrored by the people who are going into people's homes, who do have that immediate impact on people's lives. I myself have overheard really distressing conversations between colleagues who are still making the very assumptions that led to the tragedy of Ishak losing his life. And that's something that really has to change. So that cultural piece is something that really needs to be driven home. And there has to be some very honest conversations about why culture isn't quite where it needs to be in order to make this shift that we're pushing so many resources towards. We can push as many resources as we like towards this, but unless the people who are actually delivering these services have that mindset and that open-mindedness to actually be curious as to why they're seeing damp and mold in a home, as opposed to attaching a certain assumption because they see particular faces in a home, then we're doomed to repeat this over and over again. And I know that we're short on time, so very, very briefly, I think that a lot of this is about how we support our frontline teams, and that difference of thinking as well, to thinking about our operatives, the people who go in to do repairs, as being those people who are, unfortunately, I think it is unfortunate because of how stretched services are around us, but they're having to deliver very different services to what their job description probably says. And we need to be honest about this, and we need to offer the correct support, and the training needs to be not just one-off, but continuous. I could go on forever, but I will leave it there. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Denny. Andrew, I'm going to bring you in to follow on from those amazing points I think just raised there by Denny.
Hi, I'm coming from a non-housing background, so excuse my lack of understanding in language, but this is absolutely fascinating from a responsible business perspective, and I absolutely love the presentation from WHG. The one thing that I think probably we need to consider more in this is exactly what the last comment is about. Most tenants have no understanding, and I would stop there with a full stop, because I think the element that we need to consider in all the data and beautiful breakdown of everything that you class your tenants on. But I think one was missing, and that was cultural and ethnicity background, because anyone outside of the UK will not understand how the UK homes are built. They will not understand that the UK has absolutely difficult issues with damp and mold as a structure because of the weather. You're an island, you have lots of adverse weather versus a house from Spain or Nigeria or the Middle East. The construction itself is different. So trying to explain that to someone that, one, does not speak English at all or speaks very poorly, even in their own language, to bring a translator to explain to them how a UK house is built and why you need to take extra care of it, is an additional thing that most people do not have the comprehension for, or we don't communicate to them in that way. So probably from my side is, I've got nothing to add to the agenda because I've got nothing about housing, but I understand people that don't come from this country and how they don't understand anything to do with the UK, let alone how a brick is actually done in the UK versus how a brick is done in Asia, for example. So that's my 2 pennies.
No, and I really appreciate it. I think there's a community for all voices and all thoughts. So please, it's a really useful bit of insight. And I can see from the chat there, because I'm going to go to Rob for final thoughts in a moment. But, Bob has mentioned in the chat, when the first talk of damp and mold came to the fore, it suddenly became he feels it's a detriment of other repairs and can see that becoming the norm. And I think this is something that Rob touched on in his presentation day, which is that damp and mold is a huge problem, but here are another load that we're also dealing with at the same time, and we've touched on allocations and lettings and shortage of housing and those kind of things and overcrowding, etc. It's this system we're in at the moment, and damp and mold is a big part of it. And you're right, Bob. End of the day, the light has been shone on damp and mould because it's been tragic, just as it was shined on fire risk because of what happened with Grenfell and Lacan House fire. This is unfortunately going to keep happening though until we get our houses right, and that's the real challenge that people like Rob and others have got. Kate had mentioned that it's amazing to see the work WHG have been doing. However, how are you preparing for the other 20 plus risks under the HHSRS, which will be implemented by 2027? I think that's again tying into that piece. And Brian had mentioned, which goes to Andrea's point, most tenants don't understand HHSRS, don't understand the RAG rating system, and many staff are in the same boat, which is where good communication is a need in which everyone understands. And I think housing is unfortunately a sector that loves an acronym, and it also assumes that everyone else understands those acronyms. And I've been in roundtables and other events where suddenly I've been Googling, so what is that? And yet everyone around the table knows what it is because they're in the same space, and we can sometimes get quite caught up by that. Rob, we're going into the last kind of 2 or 3 minutes, really. I appreciate there was an awful lot there in terms of information coming through. I'm going to go to you for kind of thoughts on a bit of a wrap-up, but also that this is very much still, even though I feel WHG are much further along in the journey than a lot of other providers personally, you will still feel you're at the beginning of it.
Yeah, just to come back on a couple of those previous points. So for the first one, I think the point around understanding people's understanding of our system and the way that we work, we do make lots of assumptions. I didn't show, we do collect lots of data on, ethnicity, language, etc. And that does go into our data and the way that we work. But we can always learn more. And I thought that was a really interesting point that, we do kind of accept and we assume a level of understanding of the way that things work that perhaps we shouldn't. And I think we just need to continually keep challenging ourselves in those areas. On the other person's comment around leadership, it's really interesting this week. So this is our Walking the Blocks week. So we have 2 weeks at WHG where the board, the executive and senior leaders, we walk every landing of we've got 16 high-risk, high-rise buildings. We walk every floor of those buildings and we meet tenants and we talk to them. We've got the FRA in our hand and we're looking at the reality versus what the board are seeing. And I think, in all of these areas, good leadership, an engaged board who have got sight and vision, not into the paperwork, but into the reality of the business. I can remember going to a board meeting and a board member saying to me, can we be assured that we haven't got one of these black mould flats in our stock? And I had to say, no, I can't give you that assurance. I cannot. I can tell you if we know about one like that, we will have done something about it. But there might be somebody sitting in a home like that we don't know about yet. We were doing that shift at that time from reacting to kind of proactive engagement and looking and actually going out and physically looking for stuff. So I think the key here, it is about leadership. It's about not being complacent, challenging ourselves. And at the end of the day, we are purpose-led organisations. So that should lead us really to making the right decisions. And I think, we need to stay true to that. And one of the things that we do here quite a lot is talk about purpose and values. And I think that's, that's at the heart of doing a good job. We will make mistakes. Everybody does. But, we should all be trying to do the right thing by our residents.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you so much for coming on. Next week, if you are a regular, you'll know we do these every Tuesday at 11. Next week, we're talking about the role of gamification and resident engagement with Claire from Tentacles Change and the team from Golden Marzipan. So a bit of a different change of tact. And then a couple of weeks, Sangabana talking about building better homes faster. So as always, we're quite varied and we're trying to be on here. But I think the important thing from today is that understanding, and those 2 things that really came out to me is that communication piece and how broad that needs to be, but also just that ability to be able to go, you know what, actually this is on us and we are taking ownership for this and we're going to do our very, very best to keep kind of running with this as well as we can. And Rob, the whole team at WHG and what you're doing there is fantastic. And it's difficult in the current market to be fantastic because at the end of the day, fantastic is almost just like good enough. It's a weird kind of blend of the two, but it's brilliant to see what you're doing, and I really appreciate the insight and everything you brought to today. Thank you, everyone who joined us. Looking forward to seeing you all at a future session. But for now, Rob, WHG and the team, as well as Alertical and CMSG for sponsoring us. Thank you, and we'll see you all very soon. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you.